Today's guest is an author and a business leader who teaches the principles of kindness, gratitude, integrity, humility, and acceptance as both a path to peace and to joy. His new personal growth and development book, The Unicorn in You, offers an on self-help approach by identifying a sensible path to peace and joy and secrets to personal and professional success. Welcome to the show, Josh. How are you doing?
I'm great, Toby. Thank you for having me, and I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, same here. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Like I said before we started recording, that we booked this up, months ago, like in January 2022, and now we're May 2022, having this wonderful conversation. Our time flies by, right?
It's wonderful. It was worth the wait, so it's great to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I would just love us to start with, talking about you, about your background, about your bio. Like, what inspired you as a very successful real estate executive to, delve into personal growth and development? What's the story or the inspiration behind that?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because the book really took probably almost 2 years to make, but I tell people that it really was probably 25 years in the making. This started probably in my mind in my late teens when I started to have some struggles with my mental health and sense of sadness. And what I found was that I leaned on self-help books. And at the time, we didn't even call them personal growth and development, but I enjoyed them. They gave me a sense of comfort. I think that in many ways, I would take a little piece here, a little piece there. They didn't really have any lasting effect, but I would like to try to, use them as needed. And around the time of the pandemic, when this whole world changed, I remember feeling a certain way, this kind of sense of anxiety, and really it was confusion, not knowing what was going to be coming. And I thought back to the self-help books that I read, and I couldn't recall anything real naturally. Nothing really came to me instinctively, and I thought that there has to be an easier way, kind of an unself-help way, that's something very much more organic. And that's when I considered these ideas of these principles of how, in order to be light, which is what I was seeking, we first had to be solid. So that was kind of the genesis and the origin for the start of the book.
Wow, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, it all started at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Of the pandemic.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And were you able to, on this journey of writing the book, able to find yourself? Were you able to grow in your personal wellness or your personal, development journey?
No question. In many ways, writing it was very therapeutic. I think that I was discovering what principles guided me. At the start of it, I had been to an event with an author a few months prior, and he had asked me, in your life, what do you know that matters most? What's important to you? What's your North Star? And I said, I think kindness is everything. I just have always believed that compassionate kindness. And so I really started this foundation with kindness. And I said, okay, what else? What else could give me this sense of comfort, remove some of the weight off of my shoulders in this time that's very unknown? And that's when I kind of dove a little deeper into the things that I knew that mattered most to me, but also that could give me that sense of peace and joy. And then I, found that gratitude was so important, and integrity, certainly that's an important one right in the middle there. Humility, I thought, was an underrated principle. And then that idea of acceptance kind of as the anchor of these principles, how when we accept things in our life, we can release some of the burdens that we carry.
Yes. And you put all of this wisdom, all of this knowledge into this book, The Unicorn in Us, or Unicorn in You. And, you shared it with the world, and it has been available on Amazon since February 17th, 2022. So would you like to, share a little bit about this book and what led you to, finally publish the book, release the book to the world to read?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because around March of 2020, when we're all kind of in lockdowns and understanding what we're going to be doing now, and unfortunately, I knew that people were going to be suffering. I knew that professionally, personally, unfortunately, over the past few years, I've known a number of people who really struggled, who didn't survive. And so I thought that there were going to be gifts that came from this time as well as responsibilities. And so the idea of writing this book was kind of, okay, how can I uncover some of these gifts a little more clearly to myself?
Yeah.
And what I did was I started the process and I actually put it down. I thought that I was not going to be confident enough to share this with the world. I didn't feel like this was something I wanted to put out there. Admittedly, it's not groundbreaking or earth shattering, but I think that it does position it in a very unique way. Like you mentioned, it's an unself-help way. Number one, because it doesn't feel like a process. It doesn't feel like the self-help thing where you have to think through. And the other reason is that it really takes the emphasis off of self. That's why it's really an unself-help as well. The common thread between these principles is selflessness. And so it took several months, and I put it down. And then probably at the beginning of last year, I said, you know what, I have something to say. I think that the perspective is unique, and I think it's important. And most importantly for me, it was helping me. And so in many ways, I wrote the book out of self-preservation.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I can totally relate to that because, I also started this podcast, 2020. And I started, I think at the beginning of pandemic or so, or, some months into the pandemic. And I was just also on that journey to, find, that fulfillment, find that, joy inside of me. I just felt like there was something that I was not doing. And at that moment was the right moment to just start out. And as you already shared correctly well, I mean, it's brilliantly well. I mean, it also helped me to grow in some ways and like finding that kindness also, finding that joy in me also. Yeah.
And I'm sure you found that you learned so much and gained so much from speaking with others. People speaking with you, I'm going to get so much from speaking with you today. And yet I'm sure that you found it was helpful for you. And in some ways we look at it, it's self-serving. You feel badly, but at the same time, you gain so much, I'm sure, from doing your show.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why I could relate to, that on-self approach that you said, on-self-help approach, basically, because it's like, it's called like, maybe a self-improvement podcast or personal development podcast, but still there's that on self-help approach towards it because you just get to learn from it in a selfless way, basically also.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So how would you compare yourself, before writing the book and right now? Like, what would you say has changed basically? Like, how do you feel right now?
That's a great question. And I haven't been asked that. And as I reflect a little bit on who I was writing the book, and certainly the same person, but hopefully a little bit more enlightened, a little more evolved, I think that from the book perspective, I really enjoyed writing it. I found that on one hand, I called it a labor of love, but it didn't feel like labor. It was just all love. It came from a place of all these years of building up this sort of sensibility about the world and life and how to navigate the feelings that we all feel.
Yeah.
And as I am now, I think that I'm hopefully evolving into this person where I look at people that I admire, and I feel like sometimes the ones that I really think the most of, they carry themselves with the sense of lightness about them. And it's because they're so solid deep down. The word I would use to describe people was like, you seem so whole. Like you in particular, to me, you seem so intact, so whole. You know who you are. You know what you stand for and what you're about. And that was the essence of the principles. It wasn't just for, let me put this out here as an academic exercise. It was, reality and practice. And so I think now what I found is that it simplified my life. I think that I'm a much less complicated person because I've distilled so many of these things into its simplest form and saying, listen, I don't have all the answers, but I can acknowledge that and recognize that. And I also have to carry this weight and worry of expectation. So that's a great question. I'm probably going to be thinking more about it later and get a better answer for you later.
Well, that was a wonderful answer already. That's great. Yeah. Wow. So can you dive into these 5 fundamental principles that you shared in the book? Like, what are the 5 principles and standards that we could use to identify a sensible path to peace, joy, and professional and personal success?
Sure. Well, I'll give you what I'll do is I'll give you the 5 principles, and in the book I distill one key ingredient for each, and I'll break them down that way and kind of give some examples. So the first, as I mentioned, is kindness. And again, what I do say in the book, and I acknowledge, I said, this is not a prescription. This is meant to be a guide. And in many ways, like you probably enjoy books that can be sort of like this compassionate guide you keep on your nightstand, you refer to. It's not a very big book. I have a copy here, in fact, and so it's meant to be colorful and warm and something that's comforting.
Yeah.
And so for me, this idea of kindness, That's where it begins. And I think the key to kindness is compassion. I think that compassion-driven kindness allows us to let go of our judgments of people. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from kindness. And the idea for people that maybe struggle with, letting go of judgments, and when we stand in judgment of people, is using our sense of imagination. We all have childlike ability to imagine things, and sometimes I think we imagine the worst. And so maybe you have an encounter that, doesn't go your way, you feel like someone maybe has slighted you, and maybe to use a little more imagination to give them benefit of the doubt, maybe wonder what's going on in their life. And I think it allows us to kind of take it down a notch a little bit and let go of some of that rush to judgment. So kindness by compassion, I think, is first. Gratitude, I think, is the easiest one to get started with. And that's the second principle. And I think gratitude has to do with awareness. And to me, it doesn't matter what you do for your gratitude practice. I just think you have to have something. Even if it means that for 30 seconds out of the day, you stop and acknowledge and take a moment. We're so captivated by our phones and everything going on in social media, and we don't take a moment break. And whether it's in the morning that you write in your journal, in the evening that you take a moment of reflection, I think gratitude is the easiest one to get started with because it's the clearest path to peace and joy. It's this idea of understanding that things can happen, if you look at it in a certain way, for us, not to us. We're not wronged by things. Things happen as having value to us. And I think that's kind of important. So those are kind of the first two of kindness and gratitude.
So, sometimes in this, in this world where there are a lot of different things going on that are so unfavorable, some people find it, difficult to be grateful, basically. How do we, intentionally stay with the art of gratitude in a very unfavorable condition or situation?
Yeah, that phrasing, that for me, not to me, I think helps get us there. For me, I enjoy being outside. I enjoy nature. I probably connected deeper with it at the start of the pandemic because here I am in the Northeast. It was cold. It was mid-March. And finally, a couple weeks later, when it felt like we could get out of the house, I would go for a walk. And I think that I saw nature in a completely different way. And I think nature is a way that we can stop and almost reduce the size and scope of our self-importance and feel grateful for even the smallest thing. And I think maybe that's a better answer to your question. I think that's where it begins. Finding something even in the smallest way to be grateful for. Maybe it's a meal. Maybe it's, maybe we're rushing to work and we have a tough day ahead, but we think about how grateful we are to have a car. And things like that. And I think that when you stop and reduce it down to those small things, and for some people they're not that small, I think that can go a long way. And I do think that gratitude is the type of thing that it's a muscle in many ways. We have to build it up. We have to continue to be thankful and acknowledge. And that's why I think that the key ingredient is awareness, because we're not going to have any of that gratitude or thankfulness without being aware.
That's true. Wow. So we move from, and being kind or kind by compassion and, to being grateful for things. So what's the next principle? Or next one?
So right in the middle is integrity. And I was telling the story this morning. I was on a program as well about how I went to a conference recently, and very accomplished author, personal growth and development, and he's talking about integrity, and he is basically shredding the concept of it. He's saying, what does it really mean? Let's break it down. And he had this all elaborate explanation and definition. I think integrity needs no definition. It's the clearest thing. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And we know what it is, and it's one of those things that doesn't need to be defined. But when I break it down in the book, I think what drives it is decency. We can talk about honesty and trustworthiness, but I think having integrity really has to do with having decency. I grew up very fortunate in my life, but one thing I remember that was being always instilled in me was the idea that your word has to mean something. When you shake someone's hand, that means something if you agree to do something, if you say you're going to do something. I think in today's day and age, it's so much easier for us to maybe change our plans or say, no, I'm running late, or, not just keep your word. And I think that integrity, in many ways, the way it leads to peace and joy, I give an analogy in there. It's a famous line, this idea that having a clear conscience is the softest pillow. And it really is very true. And I think integrity has much to do with that. So I think integrity is incredibly important and almost leads into the fourth one, which is humility. And humility, I think, just allows us to get better connected to our significance, but really our insignificance in the world.
Yeah.
I think humility has to do with perspective. And oftentimes we think it's all about us. And we worry too much in a ways that's so self-absorbed and self-centered. And I think humility allows us to escape that in many ways. And what I think is helpful in getting more humility is cultivating awe. And again, going back to that idea of nature, just go outside, go for a hike, just go take a look at everything around you, and you could feel how small we really are. And I think that's so important. So integrity and humility are the next two. And those are something that I know you probably feel very strongly about too, because in all your work, that's something that you have to look at as a host. You always show up on time. You do what you say you're going to do, right? And you come with a sense, it's all in your aura, this sense of humility.
That's good. That's true. Yeah, yeah. And I love what you just said right now. Like whenever I go for walks, for example, I always have that imagination or simulation in my head that, I'm just a very tiny being in this old universe. Like the universe is so vast and big, and I'm just like a dot.
That's right.
So no matter what I have, no matter, how much money I have in my account or cars I have, whatever that is, whatever wealth that will come in the future, for example, it's still just a dot in the whole of the universe.
It's nothing. We're and even those with, however more or less, it doesn't matter. We're all still the same. And I think that's exactly the point. You raised such a good point. We're all the same. We all feel a lot of the same things, and in terms of our importance, we're all special, we're all unique, but in the scheme of things, we're tiny, we're ephemeral, we're very small in this universe. And I think that, for me, I think coming to terms with that was really helpful because it almost took the pressure off. I didn't have to think I was more than I am, and I certainly didn't have to feel more significant. And that, in many ways, reduced some of that weight and worry and anxiety that I carried.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. Yeah. So what's the last principle then?
Last principle is acceptance. And you guided me through them perfectly, because acceptance is a really terrific anchor to this. And initially I came up with this idea that maybe tolerance would be important. But tolerance feels like you're putting up with something. Acceptance feels like, in many ways at least, you've come to terms with. And I believe that acceptance is a sign of maturity. I think it's a sign of being sensible and being practical. Because what it really is saying that I am acknowledging what is, my reality, rather than regretting what isn't. And I think that everyone knows people that are either living in the past or haven't gotten through things in their life. And I'll put a caveat here that there are things that people have gone through that are unimaginable, tragic occurrences that I'm not going to simplify this and say just accepting it is going to make things better. But in terms of the things that we don't want to happen in our lives in our day-to-day, I think accepting them just makes life a little bit smoother and a little easier. And I think acceptance has to do with flexibility, specifically in our minds. This idea that we can hold conflicting thoughts in our heads. We can feel happy about one thing and sad about another, and we can hold them all. We have enough flex or stretch in our minds to hold them both. And one tip that I give in there is this idea of finding the positive to make peace with it. And so, as an example I give often, all of us have relationships that maybe ended, and whether we wanted them to or not, and they're hard to get past sometimes. But I think maybe finding the good in it, finding the positive, allows us to make peace and then come to terms with the fact that it is over. And that's reality, and not sitting there regretting what isn't.
I love that. Yes. And not regretting what isn't, as in just accepting the situation that you're in. And I think it all connects to each other, basically. Like you accept your situation and you are grateful for it. You look at it from a perspective that is good. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to send you on the book tour, Toby, because you explain it better than I do, and the way that you connected those things. But it's interesting because I always talk about a thread, and I like that thread because you're right. You are accepting something and being grateful for it. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, that's true. And that brings out the unicorn in you, basically.
Yeah, that's
Which is
right.
a special person. Yeah. But
That's right.
Yeah, sorry. No, please go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. I love that you said that. The unicorn, and you again said it better than I've been, talking about it, people. The unicorn's the special person in you. That's really what it is. I discuss it as being aspirational, but it's about that special person in you. That's it.
Yes. And how can we bring out this special person in us in our relationships, for example, or as a real estate executive like you are? How can you bring out that special person? How can you apply those 5 principles to your business, your work, to your activities?
Yeah, I think that these principles are really universal, and they're not exclusive to our personal or our professional lives. I recently wrote a piece about how to find peace and joy in the workplace. And it was an interesting article to write because as I was going through it, I'm like, there's really nothing different than what I'm talking about here. And as an example, I'll give one. Because this was a true story. A friend of mine shared an example how she was on a Zoom call from work. She was working at home, and her toddler wandered in and created a little bit of an interruption, but not much. Yeah. She ushered the child out. She was embarrassed, but she returned and tried to move on quickly. And of course, she caught the people giving a little eye roll and kind of the audible sighs. And rather than that, it was more disruptive than the actual interruption. It changed the whole energy of it. When someone looks down dismissively and maybe using, again, that imagination. What's it like for her to work at home with a child, trying to care for the child and do work and juggle all these things? So some imagination, some benefit of the doubts, and some letting go of those judgments. I think that's so important. So that's one example in the modern day workplace from people working at home and going through some of those challenges.
Oh, that's true. Wow. And how would you advise those people to show kindness and maybe gratitude to this lady for juggling everything up together? Like, how can those people change in their ways to become much more kind or much more grateful for that situation?
Yeah, that word change, I think change in their ways is a great turn of phrase, because I think maybe the best suggestion would be to change positions with them, walk in their shoes. Try to picture what it would be like if you were home, taking care of a small child, trying to be on a Zoom call, and feeling that you've now disrupted the meeting, but it really wasn't that big a deal. Ushering a child out and coming back and seeing people look at you with contempt. How would that feel? And I think we can get much closer to compassion when we change places with people. You're certainly going to get a little bit more benefit of the doubt.
Yes. And how would you say all of these principles, then contribute to our foundation for being? Awesome.
The foundation for being, is the essence of the book. And my thesis, as I mentioned, is this idea that to be light, we first have to be solid. And so I think, when I think of a foundation, I always think about this ideas of fundamentals. Someone gave me a great analogy today of the idea of like sports with our fundamentals when we work on the basics. So I think when you talk about the foundation, I think it has to do with getting back to basics.
Yeah.
I think that has to do with, hey, what are we doing well in our life? How am I, when I take stock of how I'm doing with kindness and gratitude and integrity and humility and acceptance? They're basics. They're fundamental, but they're foundational to who we are. And if nothing else, I think that I would hope that the book in this conversation prompts people to think, what are the principles in my life that matter to me? What are the principles that give me peace and joy? And what are the principles that make me who I am, that make me feel solid? Yeah. And I think it's a very interesting exercise to people to go through, if nothing else, to take inventory of the ones that I've provided. Yes,
that's true. Yeah. And how would you know when you finally start feeling that peace and joy in your heart? Like from your experience, how do you finally, after practicing integrity and humility, how do you finally start feeling that peace? And how do you know, yes, now I have peace of mind and I'm having that pure joy right from the bottom of my heart?
It's a great question. And I think you almost answered it just before, or at least I'm going to take part of your answer. That idea that I talk about in the book, it's being rather than doing. I think that found a little bit of your way when you notice that you're being more than doing. And some of it just has to do with the noticing of it. When you're saying, wow, I'm not really thinking right now. It's sort of that free-flowing, light feeling. And I think that's exactly, taking us back to why of having a foundation is so important. It's this idea that I don't have to worry about, doing acts of kindness because I know that part of my being is kind. And so that there's more of a natural feel to that. And I think that once we, take note of these and spend some time with them and understand and make the part of our being rather than doing is what allows us to finally see that we're actually, closer to peace and joy, because you'll feel it. It's a feeling.
Yeah, that's true. I love that. Yeah, it's a feeling that we just feel. Basically, it's natural.
That's right. And you know what? I'm so glad you asked that too, because I was talking the other day and I said, this isn't a book about happiness. This isn't a book about finding your purpose. This is about finding a path to peace and joy. And I specifically use that word. I don't think it's the path. I'm a believer that if anything helps and doesn't harm others, I love it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I do think that there are benefits and there's real merit to having a simplified process here, because it's not a process, having just sort of a simplified perspective. It's having, I can't go through this whole thing that's so unnatural to me and it's not instinctive. And if I have to think through, I just read a beautiful book the other day and I loved it. And I got to a point where they were talking about their principles and values. And it was wonderful, except that for me, there were probably 5 subsets of values. There were all different sections. Then within them, there might have been about 28 different principles. I want to talk about 5 and 5 only, because it's the type of thing, when we say I can count on one hand what matters or the people that matter. I believe that we can distill the things that matter in our life, very, very simply like that.
Yes. Oh, good. Wow. Yeah, a question just came to my mind right now. As a business leader, you're also a business leader in your rights, and you ask us to be kind, for example, and to be humble. And when you're in a business sphere, for example, it could be very difficult to as a leader to be humble, because you are scared maybe the people underneath you or your colleagues, for example, will misuse that kindness of yours or that humility of yours. So what do you do, or how would you advise a business leader like yourself in this kind of situation?
I just spoke to a sizable company in the Southeast United States about these principles, and it was a very different discussion, because you're right. When you talk about gratitude and kindness and integrity, and, well, integrity aside, perhaps humility and acceptance to a business community, they're not quite sure how to receive it. What does this have to do with, how we're performing, or what our goals are, or our strategy?
Yeah.
And I would argue that it has everything to do with it. I think that we're better business people when we're better people. I really do believe that. Perhaps I'm a little bit of an anomaly. I think that we can only be better business people once we're better people. And I think that it's so important to incorporate these things, because whether you have a small company or a large organization, even fostering these types of principles in the sense of gratitude within your employees can be very, very useful. Having that sense of kindness where there's compassion for one another, I think only, ultimately enhances a bottom line. Integrity, I'm a believer that in business you have to have it. I think there's no other way, and I know that a lot of people don't agree with that, unfortunately. And humility, I think in many ways can reduce our expectations. I think that they can almost take some of the pressure off, and we could still be very ambitious, but I think that we can be better humans and better people in doing it.
Yeah, I was just having a picture of of the walls of Wall Street, for example,
right?
And then putting them beside the values that you just shared about being kind and being humble. And I'm like, it does not really fit into each other.
They would not fly at that organization, and I've seen it again recently. And I don't believe that these are the principles of was it Stratton Oakmont, right?
Yeah,
would be there. But look, I think that maybe because I have been fortunate, but more than that, I've had times that haven't been so great. And I don't mean just personally, but professionally as well. And I still have come to this realization that when it's all said and done, what matters most is how we treat one another. I really believe that. I don't think that, there's so many different phrases today, this idea of going deep or being vulnerable. New normal is my least favorite of them because I don't think anything's normal. But all of those things, or at least the first two, I don't think they're for their own sake. I think that they have to do with something much more important and bigger, which really has to do with how we treat one another. And that's why humility is something that I think is, so underappreciated. We're no more important than one another. We're all just people on this journey, and it's a journey. It's a winding road. That's why I use the word path. We're just trying to, be better and improve and hopefully, be good to one another.
Yeah, I love I love the fact that you brought up this winding part because it's in your book also. I was going through the preview on Amazon. I'll put the link in the show notes of this episode for everyone who's interested, and also your website too. So at the website has the links to Amazon and to other platforms that want to buy this book also. You talk about the winding roads to finding peace and joy, and like, wow, it's not a straight path, right? It's like a path that you just have to. But how would you encourage someone out there to be consistent and just be persistent on going on this winding road and not give up on the way and say, oh, okay, I don't have time for this, basically.
Yeah. I had a goal, at the beginning of the year that I reflect on a little bit. And this year, it maybe was a goal or resolution, but it was more of an intention, perhaps is a better word. I had an intention this year to slow down. And I feel like I have, like many people, I'm moving from one thing to the next. And especially with the book coming out this year, and as you mentioned, last several weeks have been wonderful with it. And in many ways, it's required me to slow down, and it's been a reminder of what my intention was. And so when you talk about that path and those who have said, oh, come on, this is silly, or I can't do this, or life happens, and I understand that. And that's exactly the point, is that life doesn't stop. But I think that when we just keep going and going and don't stop ourselves to maybe appreciate what we have, to be kinder to people, to be more humble, to act with integrity, and to accept things as they are. Well, we don't just slow down and stop to recognize this, that life is moving. I think that that's when maybe we give up a little bit. So I think slowing down is really the key. A small thing, and this may or may not, make sense, but I remember this year, before I left in the car, I took a moment just to kind of take a breath in the car, rather than getting in, closing the door, turning on, and backing out. It was just that small pause. Yeah. And so maybe it's not slowing down, but pausing at certain moments of your day. Maybe when we have a break, and I do this now too, I put my phone down. I put my phone down and I look out the window, and I kind of, this idea of being present in the moment, that's how you be present in the moment. You pause. If there's, ever this idea of really understanding how we allow ourselves to just be still, we pause. Yeah. And so I think that's a really, really good tool. Do you find that you're able to, throughout your busy day, have a moment to step back and reflect and take a breath and say, wow, it's beautiful out, or wow, I'm so fortunate? Are you able to allow yourself to stop and do that?
Yes, but I have to be honest. I always do that. I always achieve that only when I'm very intentional about it, because there are a lot of distractions that come on the way. But I thrive. I would say I thrive to find the time to just focus. Mostly, I also do this. Like, I love the fact that you say you put your phone down. Like, I just intentionally also just go for walks, and sometimes my phone is with me, but like maybe I'm completely disconnected from, the internet and everything. And I just go for a walk and reflect on maybe this wonderful conversation that I'm just having with you right now, and just, just being grateful for different connections and relationships, basically. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it takes that, intention, because you have different things coming to your mind, and that distractions that are just persistently there.
It's true. Do you have on your phone, I don't know which iPhone I have, but it shows me, or has been showing me, my screen time. And like each week, and on Sunday morning I'll get up and I'll look at, that's the other thing, I try not to look at my phone in the first thing in the morning. But everyone has little tricks. But when I see that screen time for the week, sometimes it makes me sick. And I'm thinking, look how much time I spent. I don't even remember not even so much what the value is. Sometimes I can find it relaxing and maybe it's soothing, or maybe I'm looking for something important. I'm talking about the time that perhaps I waste, where I'm doing it because it's more mindless. And I remember I went to a retreat a few years ago, and it was for 1 week. And at the beginning of it, we had to turn our phones in. I was so excited. And some people gave them were holding on to it. They gave it kicking and screaming. I ran and gave mine up. But for the first couple days, I kept patting the back of my pants, looking for it. And I'm like, what a sad commentary that instinctively, without any trigger in my mind, I don't have it on me, I'm still looking for it. By the end of the retreat, I got the phone back, and it took me probably 3 hours to turn it on. I didn't want to. And it took me another day to go check emails. I didn't want to. Yeah. And I think that there's often this fear of losing connection, but it's that idea of disconnection that allows us to, in many ways, connect more deeply with ourselves.
Yes.
And do things on our terms a little bit more.
That's true. I love the fact that you mentioned that screen time, because I also get the report of my screen time, and I'm always very baffled at how many hours I spend. I think I spend 10 hours every day on my iPhone. And I'm always scared, how come out of 24 hours, I'm actively 10 hours on my phone, or I use 10 hours on my phone. I'm always baffled. And anytime I get a report that I used maybe 20% less time on my phone, I'm always excited. Yes, I did it.
That's right. Yeah, well, where do you find your peace and joy in activities? Is it through going through a walk? Is it through athletics or movies or reading or, interactions with friends? Do you find that you get it through, different, points of unplugging?
Yes, I do. Yes, that's true. I mean, I find it when I go for walks, for example, and also listening to music. And sometimes I find my peace when I'm doing just simple house chores, like washing the dishes, for example.
Yes, likewise.
I totally disconnect while washing the dishes. I'm gone, totally gone.
That's right.
Yeah. And just doing workouts, basically. I love to wake up in the morning, have a little bit of quiet time, then work out, then, get ready for the day. I find my peace during that period also. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think I'm very much the same. Sometimes in places that are surprising. It's going to sound silly to some, but washing the dishes, it's because it's a moment of pause. I obviously can't look at my phone. I can't hold it. Yeah. And, again, not to sound too, I don't even know what, but this idea that you can feel gratitude at moments like that. And they're simple moments. And I think that when you in many ways, it's just about to acknowledging, our aliveness in some ways. I think that's really what it has to do with. I love walking. That's my oxygen. That's what I really enjoy doing. And oftentimes I'll bring music, but most often not. I don't even bring the phone. And I still enjoy reading and writing as well. And I need to be a little bit more discerning about what I watch. Because a lot of the shows, they take you down a rabbit hole. And next thing I know, I'm watching 6 episodes on, con artists, from the 1980s. And it's not constructive.
Yeah, I find a lot of comedy series very good. I mean, yes. with good content, that way I'm able to just unwind a little bit and just feel joy a little bit, or happiness, basically.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what would you say is the best way to connect with you and work with you, for example, for people out there who would love to get your book or maybe ask you some more questions and do that? So what's the best way to do that?
I would love that. And I really do enjoy interacting with people. And you can come, connect at joshkramer.com. And on Instagram, I'm at The Unicorn in You. And there's a book's website by the same name, theunicorninyou.com. So any which way to get in touch, I really would love it. I love hearing feedback and thoughts and maybe some of the principles that inspire you, and just hear anything that you have to share about the book. I appreciate everyone, giving it a chance.
Yes, that's awesome. So I encourage everyone to also, connect with you and get the book also. It's awesome. Very simple to read and filled with so much information. Like even from the little I've seen about it, I could recommend it already. So what would you like to, give out to the listeners as a closing remark? Like if you were to advise someone out there, from your life experience and from your growth so far, what would that advice or lesson be that you love to share?
Boy, that's a great, great final question. And there's a quote I've been sharing lately that I read that I really liked. And it was from Carl Sagan, and he says that we are like butterflies who flutter for a day and think it's for forever. And it's this idea that, life is very fleeting. And someone wrote recently that, life's not short, we just waste a lot of time. And I think there's merit to both ideas, but just the idea of appreciating every moment, and that, I write in the book that, do you remember the movie Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
And people used that during the pandemic of saying, it's just like Groundhog Day. Every day's the same. And every day is not the same. And every day is a gift. And in fact, a better quote to maybe leave your listeners and audience with is from one of my favorite writers and poets, Maya Angelou, who said, "Today is a beautiful day. I've never seen this one before." And I think that is a sentiment that if we all live with, perhaps we don't take things for granted as much as we do, and we live with a little more gratitude.
Yes. Oh, that's a wonderful and beautiful closing remark. Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing these fundamentals or these, 5 principles with us. Thank you so much for releasing your book to the world for people to benefit from us. So I really appreciate this awesome conversation that we had. And I encourage everyone out there to get the book and also reach out to you for further questions and further inquiries that we're unable to cover during this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toby. I'm grateful for you, my friend. I thank you for having me.